The field is the sole governing agency of the particle. What he meant by that is the field, the invisible forces, are the sole governing agency of the particle, matter. So it says human beings as physical matter are actually governed and shaped by the field. And this is what we're beginning to learn. Reading the field is very important for our survival.
The human body has an aura of electromagnetic light energy that radiates far beyond the boundaries of our physical body. Doing another simple experiment with our radio antenna, we can see that a weak or static radio station comes in more clearly just as our hand comes near the antenna without even touching it.
Arizona Senate Democrats pleased that President Barack Obama will be in Phoenix next week to speak about the economic stimulus plan. Minority Leader Jorge Garcia of Tucson says the emergency funds will hopefully offset spending cuts that the Republican-controlled legislature are imposing to balance the state budget.
It would put a lot more money into Arizona's economy.
This is simple scientific proof that our field is interacting with the field of the radio waves at a distance. Our consciousness transmits information into the field, but how powerful are our thoughts and feelings? Our DNA represents our entire genetic blueprint. It is here that everything about us is represented by letters in the DNA matrix code language. Our destiny appears fixed because of this unshakable blueprint. Dr. Fritz Albert Popp, the discoverer of biophotons in 1976, proved the origin of these human light emissions are emanating from our DNA, the core reactor from where we are broadcasting our personal energy signature. Dr. Bruce Lipton has made a revolutionary discovery that first proved that the DNA nucleus is not the brain of the cell. Rather, the intelligence center of the cell is the membrane. The membrane receives signals from our consciousness and writes the DNA code. For the first time in history, Dr. Bruce Lipton is proving that we can actually reprogram our DNA if we are dissatisfied with our blueprint, and broadcast a new message about ourselves to the universe.
The fact is that the cell membrane of the human cell actually is an information processor. And what I ultimately realized in 1985 was that that processor had a very interesting and important definition. The definition of the membrane is it's a liquid crystal semiconductor with gates and channels. When I recognized this biochemical description in 1985, I was very much amused by it because I said I've heard that exact same definition somewhere else and actually had to go search for where I heard it or found it. And what I saw was I read it in a book called Understanding Your Microprocessor, a simpleton book about how to use a computer. Basically, the definition, liquid crystal semiconductor with gates and channels, is the exact same definition of a computer chip. What this all led to was a very simple and yet very profound understanding. The cell is an information processor because the membrane reads the environment and adjusts the biology. The nucleus of the cell with its genes represents a hard disk, and the genes are programs. Our old belief system is that the nucleus and its programs were read-only memory, so that whatever the genes are, that would be our fate. However, the new insights offered revealed that the nucleus of the cell was not read-only, it was actually read-write. So basically, the cell was a programmable device. You'd put it into an environment, it would read the environment, and then adjust the expression of the genes to match the needs of that environment. So taking genetically identical cells and putting one set into a culture with certain environmental conditions caused the cell to program itself as a muscle cell, and a genetically identical cell put in yet another environment, reading the constituents of that environment would lead to the expression of a bone cell. So basically, the cells are programmable in response to environmental information. And one last piece just to tie it together for all of us to understand is that if you put a culture dish of cells into an adverse environment, then what would happen is that those cells would actually get sick and start to die. And if you take that very same culture dish and move it into a healthy environment, the same cells would immediately recover and start to proliferate, and the cultures will flourish. The relevance about all this is that we go back to the nature of a human being and recognize that containing 50 trillion cells, the human body is essentially a skin-covered petri dish. If you take your human petri dish body and put it into an adverse environment, it will cause the cells to get sick and to actually begin to die. And yet if you take that same skin-covered body and put it into a healthy environment, the cells will rapidly recover and begin to flourish again. So the important reality is that our state of health or disease is really a reflection of the environment that we live in and the environment that we perceive.
He's like, don't trust me. He goes, I will torment you. And I swear to God, that's what ended up happening. I've been tormented by this relationship.
In each one of us, there are 46 human chromosomes, among which there are nearly 3 billion base pairs of DNA. That means there are 3 billion strands inside of us to store our personal information. If we can rewrite our own hard drive by reorganizing our thoughts, feelings, and higher consciousness, we can reprogram our own personal blueprint to attain any goal we desire. As our personal energy signature broadcasts this new message, we will discover new people in our coincidence meetings. We will also gain new knowledge to apply towards our own enlightenment, relationships, careers, and life purpose. Scientific studies have shown the heart is not only the most powerful center in the body, it is the most intelligent, having the ability to receive precognition. If we can create a coherence with our minds and heart center, we can access our intuition more frequently.
One of the interesting studies that was done here at the Institute of Heart Math with our chief researcher, Dr. Roland McCready, was a study on intuition, on the intuitive response. And in that study, they had test subjects that were placed in front of a computer, and they were wired up. They were looking at brain waves, they were looking at galvanic skin response, they were looking at readings from the heart rate variability analysis, and things like that. The test subject would push a button and there would be a delay before the picture would appear on the screen of the computer. And the computer was randomly selecting the pictures. No one knew, no one could know what the computer was going to select. Some of the pictures were pleasant and some were horrific. What we found was that in many cases the body started responding to the upcoming picture, responding in the way it would normally to the upcoming picture. About 6 seconds prior to the picture actually showing up on the screen. 6 seconds prior, the body began to do what it would do if the picture was there. It was a very, very complicated study, a very detailed study, published in 2 parts in the Journal of Complementary and Alternative Medicine. The data analysis showed something very, very interesting. It showed that when that response began, that the first part of our physiology that was doing sort of the intuitive or precognitive response was actually the heart. The heart was responding before the brain. It began to go through a deceleration process that would be compatible with the picture that was going to come up. About 1.5 seconds later, the brain began to do what it does in regards to that picture. But within the human system, at the physiological level, measuring that intuitive response to an upcoming event, it was the heart that responded first. And as I read the summary of that study, I found it fascinating, because what the summary basically said was that it appears as if an upcoming event is significant or emotional, that we have a tendency to be able to sense that or to respond to it before it actually occurs. And that our biology has the capacity and does in many ways scan for the future events. It's constantly scanning for future events, but that it's something we're not aware of. We don't know that it's there. We don't know that we do it. But the punchline was it would be very useful for us to develop that. And it has a lot of utility, a lot of practicality in how we navigate our lives. And so it's just one study beginning to decode, something that's remained sort of mystical or sort of vague, which is intuition. What is intuition? And I think certainly there's a lot more to go in that area, but this is one study that indicates that there is a response, that the body itself is actually scanning for future events, and that the first responder to that entire process is not the brain, but in fact it is the heart.
We know that our whole biosystem begins to shift in terms of what we in sports psychology have been referring to as being in our zone. So when a person learns to open into that more quantum attuned way of being aware and being present, it's like instead of focusing in narrow-band, problem-focused, fear-based ways, where we're looking at some kind of threat and focused entirely on a problem, and all our internal organs begin to contract, and thus our emotional system begins to go into overreaction. When we're feeling and emoting, when we're being within that zone space, our internal organs begin to open up. They begin to relax. Our awareness field, instead of being narrowband focused, starts to broadband focus. And what studies have shown is that in that state, we actually begin to process way more bits of information per moment. And when we're in that state, we have the experience as though time is slowing down. Because we know from time and motion studies in movie projection that when we feed more frames of information per moment through a projector, it creates the illusion of time slowing down. So this is often what people experience when they're in that zone state of more quantum field, present attuned awareness. They start to feel like they can make much more effective decisions in a kind of ongoing, flow-like way. We've all had tastes of what it's like to be in this zone. Those are those magical times when you have a few hours, a few days sometimes, even sometimes a few weeks, where it seems like you just can't do anything wrong. Everything comes up roses. You're in the right place at the right time, the right information comes to you, you start to feel like you're being guided to make the right decision. So this is part of what we're talking about in terms of becoming more quantum level attuned.
In 1992, Professor Walter Schempp discovered how atoms communicate with each other over any distance through the field. He discovered in the atom, when electrons are in a higher frequency shell or orbit around the proton, the atom emits light waves carrying intelligent information, similar to the way when we are talking and communicating, our brain waves go into a higher frequency wave state. He found when the electron jumps to a lower frequency wavelength, the atom receives photons carrying intelligent information, as if they are listening, just as when we are listening, we go into a lower frequency brainwave state. The timing of when electrons jump shells to higher or lower frequency orbits is completely random and cannot be quantified by any mathematical predictable formula likened to random human behavior. There are several other behaviors in quantum mechanics that remind physicists of human random consciousness as opposed to models demonstrating repeatable and reliable mathematical timing, such as the sun rising every day at the precise expected time, and the 9 planets' orbits around it. In the quantum universe, finding precise timing and repetition of events is very difficult in certain functions of the atom and its components. Niels Bohr and Heisenberg presented to Einstein at the 1927 Fifth Solvay Conference on Quantum Mechanics that the minds of the researchers were affecting the angular momentum of the electron spin around the proton. This was because different data came in when different researchers were conducting the experiments. The data was always random and could not be quantified in a repeatable and reliable mathematical formula. As far as the laws of mathematics refer to reality, they are not certain. And as far as they are certain, They do not refer to reality. Albert Einstein. In Richard Feynman's book, The Strange Theory of Light and Matter, he tried to quantify the behavior of the timing of which light particles, photons, emanating from a light source would reflect through several layers of glass and bounce back to detectors. Light particles do three things when they strike a glass target. One, they either travel through the glass sheet, or two, they react and scatter inside the glass sheet, or three, they bounce back to give us a picture of the sheet of glass. Feynman shined his light source through several sheets of glass, allowing light particles to choose to bounce off of or react to the surface of various layers of glass. He wanted to see if there was a quantifiable formula for which photons would bounce back and which ones would travel through the glass or penetrate deeper and bounce off another sheet of glass, or scatter and react inside of it, or deeper yet, travel through all the sheets of glass. Regardless of the color of light and various other parameters, there was no way to quantify the strange behavior of light and matter. The light particles, photons, always behaved randomly as to what they would choose to do, just as in human consciousness. Could human intention be so powerful that it could tell particles of light, photons, to penetrate through several layers of glass and even solid barriers? PhD psychologist Stanislav Ojak has demonstrated his power of intention over the film plane of a camera. His intention is so powerful, he found he can cause a photograph to appear while the lens cap on the camera is blocking the lens and the film plane from receiving light. He has done this hundreds of times. He has also been able to take pictures with film and cause invisible spiritual phenomena to appear. His film and photographs were analyzed by Kodak Film Laboratories to be authentic and not caused by double exposures or trick photography.
Several abnormalities that began to occur in the photographs. People became transparent or they disappeared, light aberrations, and then entities which appear to be human-like in some form, but not as we would say it was definitely humanoid. And these aberrations went on. So over a period of about 4 years, it's 74 to, it's longer than that, 74 to 1981, accumulated over 5,000 photographs with a 22% anomalous factor in regards to that.
As Stanislav Ojak took mystical photographs of the 1972 Seals and Crofts concert, a large luminous face appears overlooking the band on stage with Cher. Then what appeared to be a band of divine beings of light pointing and perhaps even dancing to their music gazed into our world without us ever even knowing it. Could beings of light and even angels have listened to the spiritual music of Seals, Croft, and Cher? Could such beings have even inspired their music to be born?
He took pictures with the lens cap on the camera, so that the radiations that eventually were registered on the film went right through the lens cap, and the lens cap will block electromagnetic radiations. So it definitely was different radiations than electromagnetism, and that's why I've called these things subtle energies. Doesn't mean they're weak. It means they're subtle in the sense that they're very different from the energies associated with the four fundamental forces that we know from orthodox science.
Dr. Claude Swanson's synchronized universe model may help explain how we can see into the invisible dimensions of the universe and explain visions and apparitions, and how we can interact with those dimensions, but more importantly, to prove that they are part of our reality.